They say betrayal feels like a knife in the back. But what if it isn't a knife? What if it's something far worse? Something so insidious, so cruel, that it doesn't just wound you, but shatters everything you thought you knew about love, trust, and family. The night I discovered the truth, I wasn't looking for it. I was simply coming home, expecting the mundane. I had spent the evening at a friend's house, laughing, sipping wine, and enjoying a rare moment of lightness in my otherwise predictable life. But as I stepped inside, an eerie stillness filled the air. The lights were dim, the house silent, save for the faint rustling of fabric and hurried whispers coming from the bedroom. My bedroom. At first, I thought I had misheard. Maybe my mother, who often visited to help with household chores, had stayed late. Maybe my husband had fallen asleep watching television. But as I crept forward, heart pounding, the murmurs became clearer. And then I heard it, his voice, low and intimate, uttering a name I never expected to hear in that way. "God, you feel amazing," he breathed. And then, a soft giggle. Not mine. Hers. My mother. The air left my lungs. My fingers dug into the wall, steadying myself against the onslaught of nausea and rage. My husband. My mother. Together. In my home. In my bed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I just stood there, absorbing the weight of their betrayal, my mind already weaving the threads of something dark. Revenge. And it would be merciless. I didn't confront them that night. That would have been too easy. Too quick. And I wanted something more. So I swallowed the scream clawing at my throat, turned on my heel, and left as silently as I had come. I drove aimlessly through the city, my fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The betrayal pulsed through me like venom, but amidst the pain, a new sensation took root. Cold calculation. By the time I arrived home, the house was quiet again. My mother's car was gone. My husband, Daniel, lay in bed, his breathing deep and steady, as if he hadn't just torn my world apart. I stood in the doorway, watching him, my nails digging into my palm. I could have woken him, screamed, thrown things, let my fury consume me. But instead, I took a slow, deep breath and slipped under the covers beside him. If he noticed the ice in my touch, he didn't react. The next morning, I made breakfast like I always did. Scrambled eggs, toast, fresh coffee, the smell filling the kitchen as sunlight streamed through the window. When Daniel walked in, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, I turned and greeted him with a warm smile. "Morning, love," I said sweetly. He kissed my cheek, murmuring a soft morning in return, oblivious to the fact that I had spent the night plotting his ruin. For the next few days, I played the role of the perfect wife. I laughed at his jokes, brushed my fingers against his arm when we passed each other, and even initiated intimacy once, just to see if I could stomach it. It was difficult, but I had to be sure he suspected nothing. And then I did the same with my mother. I called her like I always did, feigning ignorance, chatting about meaningless things. She sounded normal, no guilt, no hesitation, as if she hadn't destroyed me. I didn't know which of them I hated more. But soon, they would both know what it felt like to be destroyed. And I would make sure their suffering was exquisite. Patience was never my virtue, but revenge required it. Rushing would make things sloppy, and I wanted their downfall to be flawless. So, I started small. The first thing I did was plant the seed of doubt. Daniel had always been a man of routine. He woke up at 6, showered, had his coffee, and left for work by 7. He liked order. Predictability. Which meant even the slightest disruption in his life would fester like an infection. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Daniel," I said casually, swirling my wine glass, "have you noticed Mom seems different lately?" He stiffened almost imperceptibly, but I caught it. "Different how?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. I shrugged. "I don't know. Distracted. Restless. Almost like she's hiding something." I let out a small laugh. "I even saw her whispering on the phone the other day, blushing like a teenager. Can you imagine? Mom, at her age, having some kind of secret romance." I smiled, watching as my words seeped into his mind like poison. He gave a forced chuckle. Yeah, weird. That was all he said. But I saw the flicker of worry in his eyes, and I knew he'd start watching her more closely now. Next, I turned my attention to my mother. During our next phone call, I wove a similar thread. Daniel has been acting so strange lately, I confided, my voice laced with concern. He's distracted. Jumpy. I think there might be someone else. Silence. Then, too quickly, she said, "Oh, honey, I'm sure that's not true." Her voice was calm, but I could hear the sharp intake of breath, the faintest tremor in her words. Hook. Line. Sinker. I spent the next few weeks feeding them carefully measured doses of doubt, letting paranoia take root in their minds. I left my phone unlocked on the counter when I was around Daniel, making sure he'd see the fake messages I had planted from an unknown number. Nothing too obvious, just vague enough to make him wonder. With my mother, I dropped hints about how Daniel had been working late, how he seemed distracted, how I sometimes caught him staring at his phone with a look I couldn't quite decipher. I watched as the distance between them grew, as their stolen glances became less frequent, as suspicion coiled around them like a noose. They thought they had control. But I was the one pulling the strings. And I was only just getting started. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wasn't punishing them with immediate pain. That would have been too merciful. No, I wanted them to unravel slowly, to feel the crushing weight of their own choices before they even realized what was happening. And it was working. Daniel had grown distant. At first, it was subtle, long pauses before answering my questions, an absent-mindedness that wasn't there before. But then, I started catching him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, his brow furrowed in deep thought. The doubt I had planted was spreading like wildfire. One evening, as we lay in bed, he rolled over and whispered, "You love me, right?" I turned to him, feigning confusion. "Of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "No reason. Just forget it." But I knew what was happening. He was starting to wonder if I knew. With my mother, the shift was even more obvious. She had always been a confident woman, one who held herself together with poise and grace. But now, she fumbled over her words when we spoke, her laughter more forced, her silences stretching longer. She was afraid. Good. I decided it was time to accelerate things. Step 1. The anonymous letter. One afternoon, while Daniel was at work, I composed an email from a burner account and sent it to his office. "I thought you should know the truth. Your wife has been keeping secrets from you. Ask her about the nights she leaves the house late. Ask her who she's been meeting. The lies run deeper than you think." I knew Daniel. He wouldn't confront me outright. He would watch me first, try to catch me slipping. And the beauty of it? There was nothing to catch. That night, I went out for a walk, taking my phone but turning off location services. I lingered in my car for half an hour, then drove to a cafe where I sat with a book, sipping tea as if I didn't have a care in the world. When I came home, Daniel was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, but he barely looked at me. "Hey," I said, kicking off my shoes. "Long day?" He nodded, but his eyes flickered with suspicion. Perfect. Step 2. The discovery. A few days later, I set the next trap. I took an old phone, one I had wiped clean, and created a fake text conversation with an imaginary lover. Then, I accidentally left it in the glove compartment of Daniel's car. It didn't take long. That evening, as we were eating dinner, he finally cracked. "You left your phone in my car," he said, trying to sound casual. I raised an eyebrow. "No, I didn't." His jaw tightened. "Yeah, you did. I saw it." I cocked my head slightly, playing my role to perfection. "Daniel, my phone's right here." I held up my actual phone, unlocking it with ease. "Are you feeling okay?" The way his face paled was delicious. He was spiraling, questioning everything. "Then whose phone?" he started, but stopped himself. I tilted my head. "Maybe you should get some sleep. You seem off." He didn't sleep at all that night. I could feel him tossing and turning beside me, his paranoia eating him alive. Step 3. Turning them against each other. The final move before the real destruction began. I knew their affair thrived in secrecy, in the false belief that they could control everything. But what if they started suspecting each other? I called my mother the next day, my voice trembling. "Mom," I said hesitantly, "I think Daniel is hiding something." She went silent. "What do you mean?" I swallowed, as if struggling with my words. "I found messages on his phone from someone." Another silence. Longer this time. "Are you sure?" she asked carefully. I let out a shaky breath. I don't know what to do. I don't want to accuse him of anything, but something feels wrong. I could practically hear her panic. She was trying to figure out if Daniel had been foolish enough to cheat with someone else, to betray her. And just like that, the first real crack appeared. Days passed and the tension thickened. Daniel and my mother started avoiding each other, their once passionate secret meetings now filled with uncertainty. I could tell Daniel was trying to find a way to bring up his suspicions to her, but he was too scared of exposing himself. And then, the perfect moment arrived. I planned it carefully. A family dinner. Just the three of us. A seemingly innocent night of home-cooked food and laughter. I made sure the wine flowed freely, that my mother had a few more glasses than usual. She always got looser when she drank, less careful. Then, as we were clearing the plates, I turned to Daniel and said, "Oh, I meant to ask, who was that woman that texted you last night?" He froze. The color drained from my mother's face. "Gotcha." "What?" Daniel asked, too quickly. I frowned, as if confused. "The text. It popped up when your phone was on the counter. It just said, 'I miss you.'" Silence. I could see it in their eyes. The panic. The spiraling thoughts. My mother was wondering if Daniel had another woman. Daniel was wondering if I had been digging into his secrets. "You must be mistaken," he said, forcing a laugh. I shrugged. "Maybe." Then I turned to my mother. "Mom, do you think men change after marriage? Like, do you think they start looking for excitement elsewhere?" Her wine glass nearly slipped from her fingers. "Why would you ask that?" I gave her a small, sad smile. "Just something on my mind." I watched as they both squirmed, suddenly unable to look at each other. I wasn't done yet. Not even close. But the walls were closing in. And soon, neither of them would have anywhere left to run. The beauty of my plan wasn't just in its execution, it was in the slow, inevitable way it made them crumble. They had convinced themselves they were untouchable, that their secret was buried deep. But I wasn't just uncovering it. I was setting it on fire. After the dinner, things changed between them. I watched as my mother started avoiding Daniel's gaze, her fingers twitching whenever he spoke. Daniel, on the other hand, had become restless, his paranoia festering like a wound. But I wanted more. I needed them to destroy each other. Step 1. Planting the final seed. A week later, I called my mother in the middle of the night, my voice thick with fake tears. "Mom," I whispered, sniffling. "Daniel, he's been acting so strange. I think he's cheating on me." She sucked in a sharp breath. "Sweetheart, are you sure?" I hesitated, letting the silence stretch before whispering. I checked his phone. A lie. But she didn't know that. I found messages. Someone calling him baby. Telling him they couldn't wait to see him again. My mother went so still on the other end of the line, I could feel her heart racing through the phone. "Honey," she said slowly, choosing her words carefully, "maybe there's another explanation." "Maybe. You misread something." I let out a broken laugh. "Mom, he's lying to me. And I don't know what to do. What if he's been with someone else this whole time? What if I was never enough?" That did it. Guilt. A poison she had swallowed long ago, now bubbling to the surface. She tried to soothe me, but I could hear the tremor in her voice, the panic of someone realizing they might not have been his only secret. She would start watching him closer now. Doubting him. Hating him. Step 2. The breaking point. It took less than a week. Daniel had grown paranoid beyond control. I'd catch him staring at his phone, his fingers twitching over the screen like he wanted to text someone, but didn't dare. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know that I was the one pulling the strings. And then, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. One evening, my mother showed up at my house unannounced. She had never done that before. Not without calling. Not without some kind of reason. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something behind her eyes, something dark. "I need to talk to Daniel," she said. I smiled. "Of course. He's in the study." I sat on the couch, sipping tea, pretending not to listen. "But I heard everything." "You told me I was the only one," she hissed. "Was that a lie?" Daniel stammered. What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "She saw the messages, Daniel." "Who else are you seeing?" The silence that followed was heavy. And then, finally, his voice, low, desperate. "I swear to you, there's no one else." I don't know what she saw, but it wasn't me. My mother let out a bitter laugh. "So, what? You're telling me she just imagined it? That it's all in her head?" Daniel hesitated. "Maybe." And that was the final nail in the coffin. My mother had already been riddled with guilt, but now she was furious. Furious that she had risked everything for him, only to discover he wasn't even worth it. That was when I heard something shatter, a glass, maybe. Then her voice, cold and cutting. "I ruined my family for you. And now you're telling me it was for nothing?" Daniel must have said something, but I couldn't hear it. Because at that moment, my mother stormed out of the study and straight past me, her face flushed with anger, her hands trembling. She didn't even look at me. Just grabbed her purse and left. And Daniel? He didn't come out for hours. Step 3. The grand finale. The house felt different after that night. He didn't speak much, didn't try to touch me. He was unraveling. And it was time to end this. The final blow came a week later, in the form of a letter, one I had been working on for weeks. It arrived at Daniel's office in a simple white envelope, typed so he wouldn't recognize the handwriting. It contained only a single sentence. "Your wife knows everything. Check the home security footage from last month." I had installed new security cameras months ago. He never paid them much attention. But now I knew he would. And what would he find? Exactly what I had left for him. I had edited the footage, just enough to reveal the truth, the blurred figures of him and my mother sneaking into our bedroom, their silhouettes unmistakable in the dim glow of the hallway light. I had left just enough to make his stomach drop. Just enough to make his hands shake. I wasn't in the house when he saw it. But when I returned, I found him sitting on the floor, his head in his hands, his entire body shaking with silent rage. I stood in the doorway, tilting my head. "Daniel?" He lifted his head, his eyes wild. "You knew," he whispered. I smiled. Of course I knew. He looked like he wanted to scream, to throw something, to beg. But I didn't give him the chance. Instead, I walked to the table, where I had already placed a neatly stacked pile of papers. "Divorce," I said smoothly, sliding them toward him. "Sign them. Or I make sure everyone finds out exactly what you did." He swallowed hard. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Silence. Then, finally, the fight left his eyes. His hands trembled as he picked up the pen, his signature shaky and weak. It was done. He was ruined. I turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there, broken, alone, trapped in the wreckage of his own betrayal. As I stepped outside into the crisp evening air, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The storm had passed. And I had won. The day after Daniel signed the divorce papers, he moved out. He didn't fight, didn't plead. He just packed his things and left, his shoulders hunched under the weight of his own shame. My mother tried to call me. Once, I let it ring. Then I blocked her number. She had chosen to betray me. Now, she would live with the consequences. Daniel lost everything, his reputation, his home, his dignity. Word spread quickly, whispers of his affair circulating like wildfire. As for me, I walked away with my head held high. And I never looked back. Weeks passed, and I expected my mother to stay away. But she didn't. One evening, as I was leaving a cafe, I spotted her waiting by my car. She looked different, thinner, older, as if the weight of her betrayal had drained the life from her. "Honey, please," she said as I approached. "Just talk to me." I didn't stop walking. I made a mistake, she continued, her voice breaking. A terrible, terrible mistake. But I was lost and I turned to face her then, my expression cold. You were selfish. You wanted something forbidden, and you took it knowing it would destroy me. Tears welled in her eyes. I miss you. I miss us. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. You miss the daughter you had before. But that woman doesn't exist anymore. I unlocked my car, climbed inside, and shut the door without another word. As I drove away, I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing alone, defeated. And I felt nothing. Daniel's life unraveled faster than I expected. At first, he tried to act as if nothing had changed, going to work, keeping up appearances. But the whispers followed him, growing louder each day. People noticed his nervous glances, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was watching. Then came the real blow. His company had always prided itself on integrity, on family values. A scandal like his? It was poison. One afternoon, he was called into his boss's office. I imagined the conversation played out something like this. We appreciate your years of service, Daniel, but under the circumstances, we believe it's best to part ways. In other words, you're fired. He came home that night, well, to whatever small apartment he had managed to find, and drank himself into a stupor. I knew this because a mutual friend, who had once pitied him, sent me a message. He's a mess. Keeps saying he lost everything. That he doesn't know who he is without you. I read it twice, then deleted it. He had made his choices. And now, he had to live with them. I hadn't planned to see Daniel again. But fate had other ideas. It happened on a random evening at the grocery store. I was reaching for a bottle of wine when I heard a voice behind me. You look good. I turned slowly, finding Daniel standing there. He looked awful. His shirt was wrinkled, his beard unkempt. There were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in weeks. For a moment, I just stared at him. Then I smiled, a small, polite thing, the kind you give to a stranger in passing. Hello, Daniel. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. I don't know what to say. I tilted my head. Then why say anything at all? He flinched. I never meant to hurt you. A bitter laugh escaped me. But you did. And that's the thing about betrayal, Daniel. It's never an accident. His eyes shone with something I couldn't quite name. Regret? Pain? Desperation? It didn't matter. I miss you, he whispered. I studied him for a long moment. Then I stepped closer, leaned in, and whispered back, I don't miss you. And with that, I picked up my bottle of wine, turned, and walked away, leaving him standing there, just another ghost from my past. The day my divorce was finalized, I didn't celebrate. There were no toasts, no grand declarations of victory. I simply stood in the quiet of my empty home, letting the reality sink in. It was over. The marriage, the lies, the pain. Daniel was no longer my husband. My mother was no longer a part of my life. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I could finally breathe. I stepped outside, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. The world around me hadn't changed, cars still rushed down the street, birds still chirped in the distance, and people still hurried through their lives. But I had changed. I was no longer the woman who had once placed all her trust in two people who had never deserved it. I was no longer the woman who sat silently, pretending not to notice the signs of betrayal creeping into her home. I had been shattered, yes, but I had put myself back together, stronger, sharper, and completely untouchable. Daniel, on the other hand, had fallen apart. I had heard through mutual acquaintances that he had lost his job, that he struggled to keep up with rent, that he drank more than he should and spent most of his nights alone, staring at his phone, probably debating whether to reach out to me. He never did. And I never would have answered. As for my mother, she had tried, of course. The texts came first, short, hesitant messages sent at odd hours. I'm sorry. I miss you. Can we talk? Then came the emails, longer and filled with self-pity. I know I hurt you, but I don't know how to fix it. Please don't shut me out forever. I never responded. I had nothing left to say. She had made her choice and now she had to live with it. One evening, I ran into Daniel by accident. It had been months since the divorce, and I had long since stopped thinking about him. But there he was, standing in the grocery store aisle, staring blankly at a box of instant noodles. He looked thinner, his face unshaven, his eyes hollow. For a brief second, our eyes met. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. Instead, I smiled, a small, knowing smile that told him everything he needed to know. I was fine. I was better than fine. I had won. I turned and walked away without a word, leaving him standing there, drowning in the wreckage of his own choices. That night I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat on my balcony as the sun set over the city. I thought about everything I had been through, the lies, the heartbreak, the anger that had burned inside me like an uncontrollable fire. I had let it fuel me, let it guide me to the justice I deserved. But now, as I sat in the golden glow of the fading light, I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt peace. I had been broken, but I had rebuilt myself. I had been betrayed, but I had survived. And now I was free. The end.